You know, that's actually a legitimate question. I had someone ask me why the weather on the West Coast and the East Coast of the United States, even though we're on the same parallel, why is our weather so different? Ah, that's important. That's important. Not just because there's an answer for that, but because he asked. Okay? The reason weather is changing both on the West Coast and the East Coast is the exact same reason, even though we sit on the same parallel. Okay? That is climate change. More energy in the atmosphere doesn't necessarily mean only warming in on the whole globe. It means changing the way the atmosphere moves around that globe. That's what's changing, and that's what's so dangerous. Because as we've seen in the past history of our planet, it doesn't take much to set off these feedback loops that all of a sudden you have another Permian. It's I can tell you that you're going to have extreme colds. You're not just going to set record heating temperatures, you're going to set record cold temperatures in places. Because people don't really understand what more energy in the atmosphere means. When the climate warms, it puts more water into the air, and water holds more heat than air. So it's a feedback loop. It gets warmer, more moisture in the air, more heat in the air, more evaporation, more water in the air, more heat in the air. It can only go so far before you start seeing shifts in these wind patterns that were always, well, not predictable. We all know the weatherman's not very predictable, but they ran a general enough pattern that computers could basically tell us useful information. Now they can't. They can predict out a week or so, yeah, but 6 months from now, no. They can go, oh, we got a La Nina forming. They know basically what that's going to do, but they can't tell you exact regional effects, just broad general effects. It's too complicated. It's too complicated. It's supercomputers struggle with it now because supercomputers are only as smart as the information we put in them. And every time they'll go out and they'll do a 5-year study, and they'll have all this data in their hands. And by the time they can get it input into this supercomputer, it is outdated. And not just outdated but outdated by a lot. So what you're seeing now is what I told you guys about the acceleration effect. I've talked about the acceleration effect for 15 years. That I started noticing that none of these reports were accurate, that they were always behind every single time, without fail. There was never one that was produced that was current, because you cannot. Things are changing too fast. Scientists work very methodically and slow to gather data that's accurate. The problem is that data is accurate for when they're taking the data point. So, yeah, I supposedly we are going to have a cold snap on the East Coast. After they had record highs, they're going to have record lows. That's from energy. Energy makes wind move. Okay? Energy helps the currents move along. And the wind, the wind starts out, and next thing you know, you've got a wave at Mavericks that's breaking at 40 feet from wind power. Because, you see, the energy goes into the ocean. It doesn't go anywhere. I know people believe that waves travel across the ocean. Only tsunamis do that. And even tsunamis are really following the basic rule, except there's a volumetric change in a tsunami and not in the ocean. Okay? In the ocean, the it starts to build a small wave, and then these little waves magnify each other as they come together and make peaks and troughs. Okay? And the more wind you put into that, the more there is. But if you watch, if you looked at a tank of water, and you put a ball in there that's floating below the surface. Let's say that my glasses is the top of the surface, and the ball is floating right here. When a wave went by, the ball would go. The ball would make a ellipse because it's not going anywhere. The energy is being transferred through the water. Okay, the atmosphere kind of works the same way. It's just thinner. Okay, so that's why it's always this temperature on the East Coast, and it's usually this temperature on the West Coast. It's why, that one of the little factors, okay, is why it's always 114 in my town, which is way far north, and then you can go down to San Diego, which is, way much further south than my place, and have it be 78 degrees. Yeah. It's just you see it's 78 degrees all the time down there. It's too complicated. It's too complicated for us to predict what's going to happen. I can tell you that it's not good. More energy, the type of change that we have made in the atmosphere is going to take 50 years to subside. But once we stop using carbon, it's going to take 50 years for it to find, a new neutral point. There'll be a new standard everywhere for, where the trade winds blow, where this current goes, what the average mean temperature is here. All those things will probably change. If we don't destroy ourselves fighting for the last scraps of food and water, then 500 years from now, we may have a stable environment that we can work with and learn to work with and maybe even manipulate to a point. I've said, and I'll always say, listen, just like the plastics in the ocean, I was absolutely flabbergasted by the amount of plastic they found off of Norway. It was off of Norway. You think of Norway as this pristine, you know what I mean? And every cubic meter had 2 million pieces of microplastic in it. I feel this wave of shame go through me when I hear a number like that. Shame, absolute shame for my species, what we've done. We've shit all over our own beds and our floors and our backyards and we just totally, like pigs is how we've treated our planet. This is not going to get better. It's going to continue to get worse. The interior parts of the United States will see long, hard, sustained changes that will settle in, and they will be consistently bad. The East and West Coast will continue to see storms and droughts with periods of flooding and droughts. It's the way the atmosphere moves around the globe. You have to think of it as, a liquid globe that's hollow, and the Earth sits in there. Okay? That's why we have trade winds. The rotation of the Earth drags on wind, drags on the atmosphere. It's so complicated that it takes a supercomputer to tell you what's going on. The problem is we just can no longer, at this point in time, and I don't think we will be able to do real hard 5-year studies and get any useful information out of it whatsoever, because the changes will have become so drastic. The feedback loops have taken effect, and so that immediately shit cans their data. because they cannot calculate feedback loops right now. It's not part of the data. Methane blowholes in the Arctic are not in the data. The additional methane is not in the data. That's scary for me. It almost seems like it's still being controlled, the way they tried to control Dr. Keeling when the oil companies were the ones that said, well, we need you to look at this, because they had suspicions. Scientists had told them certain things, and they were like, well, we need to find out so we can cover our ass. Not so they could stop it, not so they could save the world. They put him to work to figure out how they could continue to lie and spend money and buy our fucking, politicians, and continue to kill our fucking planet with plastic and carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is going to increase because of these new weather patterns, new temperatures, new moistures in the air. Pretty soon, smog is going to become a real problem. Okay? So carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and methane will all combine to make our lives just absolutely miserable. Everybody's seen Soylent Green, right? The extremes that we're building to are going to lead to extremes. And that just horrifies me. And I think about my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. I just shudder in fear. I shudder in fear. Any of you out there that have children or are going to have children, okay? Or you have like a younger brother or a younger sister, listen, you owe it to yourself and the world to go fight. You need to be an eco warrior, okay? You can't just, start a YouTube page. Let's flood YouTube with people saying, okay, enough is enough. The oil companies have made enough fucking money. They've lied to us long enough. They've bought off our politicians long enough. And make the AI through volume start shuffling this information out to people instead of, chicks bouncing on a fucking trampoline in bikinis. Let's the only way we're going to be able to do this is to overcome the system that's put in place to keep us blinded. I've heard nothing about methane blowholes on the fucking news. You know why? Because if they had helicopters flying over, seeing these giant methane blowholes or these giant lakes that are now starting to form all over the fucking tundra and leaking methane, if every night on the news we saw that kind of information, the oil companies would be fucked. So what do? They bought the TV stations. They're heavily invested in oil. That's the flow of information. Just like Russian television is propaganda, American television is propaganda. If you don't believe that, then you can get in serious trouble with the truth, okay?